So this is Tony Lanzafame. Welcome to today's Microsoft SLG Modern Work webinar. It's the topic is secure collaboration, which I'm sure is near and dear to everyone, as people are starting to return to the office from the pandemic, and we're also starting to see a lot of cyber security events, pop up throughout the United States. So we've got our friends from ViCom, a converge company, that are going to present today. With that being said, I'm going to hand over to Bill Sager to kick things off. Bill, you're muted.
All right, Tony muted me. So, hi guys, this is Bill Sager, a senior account executive at ViCom, a converge company. Thank you for having us today. I'd like to start out real quick by having some introductions of my team. So you just heard who I am. I'll pass it over to Joe Barone.
Hello, everybody. Joe Barone, one of the enterprise sales managers for ViCom / Converge for the Northeast.
And Donnie?
Hey guys, good morning. Donnie Hoped. I've been Microsoft architect at ViCom for about 10 years. Looking forward to talking with you.
And Chris?
Hi, Chris Svensson. I am a solution architect for all Microsoft's technologies in the cloud space, and I will be presenting to you in a second here.
Thank you, guys. We'd like to start out real quick, guys. This is a quick slide here on ViCom, a converged company. We're a hybrid IT solutions provider. We're part of a $1 billion organization made up of over 20 companies across North America. That's about 1,000 employees with 400 plus technical guys. And we have a significant Microsoft practice that we're very proud of. Real light on the commercial here, guys. We're going to talk to you a little bit at the end about our professional services. And I'm going to turn it over to Chris. He's one of our practice leads, and he's going to talk about protecting sensitive data in Microsoft 365. So thank you.
All right. Well, hello, everybody. I am actually going to turn off the slides because death by PowerPoint is a real thing, and I prefer not to use PowerPoint as much as possible. So I am going to talk about secure collaboration in Office 365. For about 35 minutes or so. Feel free to ask questions as we go along. I like to keep all demos interactive and make sure that I can answer any questions to come up. But we're also going to have a Q&A to end the session, just in case you have anything specific you'd like to ask about. So instead of having boring PowerPoint presentation, I'm actually going to dig straight into a live environment. So I have a demo environment that Microsoft provides. That is a fully built out Microsoft 365 environment with, I believe, Microsoft 365 E5 licensing, but all the functionality that we're going to be looking at is available in Microsoft 365 E3 as well. Some of it's also available in the Office 365 E3 and E5 options, and we can look at the differences between the license levels if anybody is interested, as to kind of round out the session. So I have two virtual desktops. I have an IT manager, Megan Bowen, that I'm going to be utilizing, and I also have an IT admin that we can send messages to and just simulate a real live environment. Installation is what you would expect within Microsoft 365 E5 licensing. We have all the various Office applications. And we also have all the Office 365 services deployed, fully built out for this environment, just so we can kind of simulate different scenarios. So the tools that we're going to be focusing on is really around the collaboration space. It is our Outlook, it's OneDrive, it's Microsoft Teams, and Microsoft SharePoint, and how you can protect the data in either one of those platforms or across multiple platforms. So that's going to be the main focus. And if I go into my Office location here, this is the office.com location for Megan Bowen. You can see Megan Bowen is logged in up here. Her picture is up here. And if I click it, I can also see a little bit of information around that, just to kind of give you the context. I also have a secondary screen that I'm trying to get to. Let's see. Here we go. So I have a secondary desktop for another individual, and this guy's name is Alan DeYoung, and he's the guy that will receive some information from Megan. Anyway, so two desktops that we're going to be working from, and we're just going to look at different aspects of these technologies. So when it comes to collaboration, there's some certain things that we want to protect. So we have different types of information. That information can be in an email form. It could be files. It could be data that resides in SharePoint sites, or data that resides in other sources. And that's really what we talk about when we talk about collaboration. So in this case, we have a SharePoint environment that's been set up in this demo environment. I can show you what it looks like. Let me shut it down, and then we go to their main SharePoint site for this company. So this is a fictitious company, Contoso Electronics. Among other things, they produce drones for the commercial and private market as well. They have different projects that have been defined that's all been set up in this SharePoint environment that they collaborate around internally. So there's going to be files, there's going to be data, there's going to be secure location that needs to exist on this platform in order to collaborate around specific projects. They have a Teams environment, and Megan is one of the higher levels within the company. She's a member of a couple of different project teams that have team sites defined with different type of information. And obviously, in order for me to show as much as possible, she's also going to be one of the administrators for the environment. So when we talk about the information that we want to protect, there's different ways to go about that. One of the more traditional ways would be to create security groups. So for instance, if we go to one of the SharePoint locations that Megan is a member of, but others may not, let's go to the Market project team, which does not encompass everybody within the organization. You see up on the right-hand corner, this is all default out of the box functionality. You see there's 19 members of this specific location. And the company has different types of information on this specific website. We have 19 members that have access to this specific location. And if we click on that field, we can see what type of access each of these individuals have to the site. So we have some individuals that are defined as owners, some individuals that are defined as members, and they all have different access rights to this specific location, depending on their job role. And if we go into individual documents, for instance, or document libraries, where we have stored information, all these individual document libraries could also have specific security settings, depending on what type of access we want to give to users. And the member role for this specific site is set to collaboration, so they can edit information, they can save down new documents, they can download documents, and all those aspects, but they cannot make any modifications to the actual SharePoint sites. That will be for the owners of the sites to do. If we want to, we can also define additional security groups. So for instance, if you want to have a role where people can open documents, they can edit documents, but you don't want them to delete documents, you can define a specific security rule, a security group within your site that basically allows people to do everything but delete content. Another role could be a reader role, where you can read anything on the site, but you cannot make any modifications. It all depends on the location where you want to collaborate and what different permissions you want users to have within this specific site. So that's all standard collaboration around files specifically. So all those settings can be modified by an administrator. So if you go on the little cog up here and you go to site permissions, all that can be defined here. So we have site owners, site members, and site visitors as the default groups. And we can invite people as members to this. We can create our own security groups if you want to look at basically creating advanced permissions on the site if you want to do that. And that's all configurable within this site depending on what permissions the visitor to the site has. So in this case, Megan is an administrator, so that's why she has additional access to make modification on the site. So that's all well and good. Everybody is familiar with traditional file shares and permissions that you can set on file shares and so forth. And you can set similar type of permissions on SharePoint locations to ensure that you can control who has access to what information. So that's kind of the baseline where we are. So when we go to the next level, so Mark 8's project team, it's a limited team within the organization. We may want to protect this information at a much more restrictive level. And what you can do within that, if you are an administrator, you have access to the admin center, and we then want to go in and modify the information that resides within the organization. There's also an information protection portion of your Microsoft 365 licensing. And in here, you can then go in and define different labels and different policies depending on what content you wanted to protect. So in this case, Megan has defined 3 levels. We have confidential for finance reasons. We have highly confidential document, and then a subcategory for highly confidential for a project named Falcon. And within this information protection screen, you can then go in and define how you want these to look. So I'm double clicking Project Falcon, for instance. It takes a second for it to load. And she has created a label called Project Falcon that she then can apply different types of policies on. So in this case, the scope of the Project Falcon label is for files and emails. All of those files and emails that are labeled by Project Falcon is encrypted, and they will also be watermarked confidential Project Falcon. So that's the rule that's set up for Megan or for everybody sending some information around that project. So how does this work then? So if I shut this down and I go to, for instance, Megan's email, and I create the new email, and I'm going to send this email to Alan DeYoung. There we have him. And I'm going to say test for Project Falcon. Hello. All right, so see, we have now a new drop down available in our Outlook, and we can go on that drop down. We can go to highly confidential, and we can click Project Falcon. And now we are applying that label to this specific document. And this could also be a Word document. It could be a PowerPoint presentation, Excel spreadsheet, whatever it may be. And this now changes the email to be highly confidential for Project Falcon. And this is automatically labeled because it contains confidential data. So if I send this information out to Alan, I send in the email, and I'm going to go switch over to Alan's desktop. You can see what that looks like. And hopefully that comes through pretty quickly. There we go. So Megan Bowen, you see we get a little preview. This message is rights managed. Click here to open, or we can just open up the document. So this document is now set to highly confidential for Project Falcon. And depending on what permissions are set on this, we could, for instance, blocking the ability to forward the document to somebody else. In this case, we're just encrypting the information. And as you can see, the text was decrypted in Alan's email client directly because Alan is part of this specific team, and that's the reason why. And if we wanted to, we could also set additional rights management features here. So for instance, to block the ability to forward. We could block the ability to reply all and other types of rights management features. So for instance, that's not allow anybody to print a document that it has this specific labeling. But as you can see, if I try to click forward here on this document to send to somebody else, it's impossible to do because this is labeled confidential and is sent to me specifically. So that's one way we can protect contents on specific locations, on specific type of email, depending on what context these emails are sent from. And that's a pretty nice manual process. And in this case, basically, when we define something as Project Falcon or highly confidential or confidential due to finance reasons, those labels gets applied and it continues to live with that email or with that file. Was that a question? All right. So that's one nice thing that we can apply these labels due to our own, basically our own will. When we want to apply a label, we can do it. There's also an auto labeling functionality that you can apply. So you can create an auto labeling policy that automatically would apply one of these labels. For instance, let's say we want to use the Project Falcon label in an auto labeling fashion.
Okay.
We can create a new auto label policy. For instance, if we have a custom field here, a custom policy, where let's say we call this Project Falcon. It doesn't really matter what the name is. And then we wanted to apply for Exchange, we wanted to apply for SharePoint, we wanted to apply for OneDrive accounts, and the policy rule can then, I'm sorry, we need to choose a SharePoint site. Let me go ahead and choose a SharePoint site. This doesn't really matter what site we're using here. Obviously, would you most likely use your project site when you define this. And I need to find the OneDrive location. Let's search for Megan. Come on. All right, let's turn that off now. It can't find my, for whatever reason. And I can go in then as specify advanced rules, for instance. If I want to define a common set of rules for all locations, I can go in and do that as well. And the rule that I can then define is that if anything, let's say is Project Falcon, that if we see the verbiage Falcon in any location, info types, and we can say Project Falcon. So let's say Falcon is the sensitivity label that we want to utilize. We can then basically specify that if that word is mentioned at any given time in the email communication, that would automatically auto label the email or the documents with this sensitivity label. And that would allow us to kind of auto label the information throughout the entire tenant. Which is a nice little feature that you can use in order to then apply additional policies on that specific location. So that is one aspect of this, and the auto labeling is all nice and good, but you also need to have policies in place to actually tell Office 365 to do something with whatever labels that you create. And that would be the next step that you would take. So if you, for instance, start with creating all the labels, you also need to tell the system that what should we do with, for instance, when we have a document that have a specific label attached. Let's say the Project Falcon. And let me see if I can get to the Security and Compliance Admin Center. Here we go. It takes a little while for it to load. And again, this is a demo tenant, so it's being used by multiple individuals at any given time, and sometimes it can be a little bit slow to react. So what I'm going to go now into data loss prevention policies, and what basically this allowed me to do is to create new policies around specific information and specific labels that I have already created. and say, for instance, if I create a policy and where I want to search for Project Falcon information, or I want to search for any other type of information, it could be personal identifiable information, for instance, could be GDPR information if you deal with the European Union, I can create policies based on that label. So for instance, if I want to create a policy here, and it doesn't really matter what policy we're looking for specifically, but let's look for privacy reasons for if that's what our concerns are. We go down and look at our US section, and as you can see here, there are certain predefined policies that are very commonly used, so you don't need to create a custom policy every single time. So if I go into US personally identifiable information data, we can see that this information is protected by this policy. So US individual taxpayer information, social security numbers, and passport numbers. I go to the next step here. I can name it. I'm going to just call it a random name. There we go. I can go in and specify exactly how I want to apply that specific policy. So as you can see, there are multiple different locations where I can enforce the policy. So it could be, for instance, for Exchange email only. It could be for SharePoint site, OneDrive accounts, Teams chats, even on devices if I have Microsoft 365 licensing levels, the MCAS, and also on-premises repositories. So if you have an on-premises file server, we can enforce this policy on an on-premises basis as well. So in this case, I don't necessarily need to specify anything, but the interesting piece here is you can do an included and excluded section as well. So for instance, for Exchange emails, and right now we're defining a policy around personal identifiable information like social security numbers, you can do an exclusion, for instance, for your HR departments, or for your legal department, and allow them to basically be an exclusion for this specific rule. So if I choose the legal team here, I now have excluded email communication among the members of the legal team group. So they can send personal identifiable information between each other, but not outside that scope. I can go in and define my policy settings. In this case, we're doing the ITIN and the social security number and passport numbers. We can go in and define that exactly what we want for ourselves. I then can go in and say, what should we do when the content like this needs to be protected? And it's a little bit difficult to read. I'm sure on some of your guys' screen here. But you can detect, for instance, when a specific amount of information is shared. So in this case, the default limit is at least 10 or more instances of the same sensitive information type, which means that if you send one social security number, it's going to be fine, but not when you send 10 in this case. So if I want to send that to 1 instead, you will react to any type of instance that looked like a social security number or a passport number or a taxpayer number, for instance. I can elect what do I want to happen. So send incident reports, for instance. I can specify who to send that incident report to, or send alerts if there are any matches of DLP rules throughout this process. What do I want to do then? Do I want to do audit to restrict activities on specific devices? So for instance, if it's a print action, if it's copying to a network share, copy to a USB ports, you can set specific action to happen. So the default here is set to audit only. But if I do the drop down, we also have the ability to block, and we have the ability to block with override. So in the audit only case, you're only going to get the reports to your security auditor group that you define. You get an email saying that this has happened, but you can also choose to block it completely, or can block with override, which means that anybody that wants to override can basically put a reason for the override before they take the action. And then the administrator will get that information. We can also do restriction for third-party apps and other things, restrict access or remove on premises files. We're going to keep it as default. And then we have a built-in capability to test the functionality before we actually do any enforcement. So that's could be depending on what policy you create, it could be good to kind of test it out yourself prior to actually applying it throughout the entire environment. All right, I am going to turn on right away, and I'm just going to do next, and I get a little summary of the policy, and then I can submit, and that's it. You have now created a specific data loss prevention policy for this environment. And that could be for a specific project, it could be for a specific type of label, whatever it may be that you want to define. All right. And your data classification you still have available from all these various aspects. You're going to get reports on the various types of labels that have been applied, how many DLP routes have been matched. You can get a lot of information from the reporting on the policies that you have basically set up throughout the environment. So I'm going to let the compliance manager load. And if, again, I apologize that it takes a little bit long to sometimes load some of these screens, and it's just based on how many people are utilizing it. And as you can see on this dashboard, you kind of get some information. There's a compliance score, for instance, very similar to the secure score that you have within your tenants, or Azure Information Protection scores. There are multiple scores across the environment to kind of give you an idea how secure you are, how many policies that you have available that you have applied. If you have turned on the auditing, that's recommended to do, for instance. And you can also see what the solutions are that affects that specific score. And you also have the ability to see remaining actions. So if you want to basically become more secure, and you want to ensure that you turn on all the functionality that you have available for you, you can go in and look at the remaining action. All these are links. And if I click audit, for instance, for remaining action, it's going to give me suggestions on improvements to basically improve my score and become more secure. So that could be, for instance, restricting access to Microsoft 365 audit information. Could be just as simple as enable audit logs overall in the environment. And all that information is available directly from the interfaces. And it's available on various different topics as well. So for instance, for your identity protection, so basically how secure your identities, and that's available in Azure AD. You also have an identity protection score that you can look at, for instance. In this case, in this tenant, it's 16.18% of all the available settings. And as you can see, there's a couple of improvement action here that may be something that you want to turn on immediately. For instance, we always recommend to require MFA for at least the administrative roles. Even better if you do it for all users. And all these actions are basically listed here. And if you click each of these actions, you can get more information about it. And in a lot of cases, you also get the information of how to actually implement it in your environment. So you get the recommendation how to become more secure, and you also get information of how to implement it in your environment. So that's pretty beneficial to have available to you. All right, there's a couple of other security aspects that are from the tools themselves that often goes overlooked. So for instance, where do files end up when you're collaborating in Microsoft Teams? So for instance, Megan here has a lot of information within her environment. If you go to sales and marketing, for instance, she has a general tab for sales and marketing, and underneath there's also a file section. If Megan uploads a file here, let's say she creates a new Word document and creates, and we'll just fill in a little bit of text here so we can get this document saved. Close and close. They should now create a new document within the general section of sales and marketing, and this is in Teams, right? So where does this specific document reside? Well, when you have a Teams channel, any documents that you create is actually created within SharePoint itself. So if I click on my team, I go to sales and marketing. This is now the document that Megan has created. So there's a couple of challenges with that. So this now ends up in the sales and marketing section, which has 20 members that can have access to this specific location because they have access rights to the sales and marketing SharePoint sites. Well, what happens if Megan has the same documents that she has created? And I'm actually going to download this to Megan's desktop just so we can use it again. There we go. Let's say that Megan is talking to Alan. And let's go and search for Alan. Alan. Hello. All right, she's sending a message to Alan. And then I'm going to also send Alan a file. So I'm going to attach a file here to the message. And it should be right there. That's the document that we grabbed before. Look at this. There we go. We send this to Alan. So where does this specific file end up now? And I'm going to go to Alan just so you can see that this file ended up in his Teams as well. There we go. I'm going to send a message and we can see that the file is available here. Well, this file is no longer on SharePoint because Megan has directly communicated with Alan. So instead of on SharePoint, let's go back to Megan's desktop. We're going to look at Megan's OneDrive location. So if I start OneDrive for Megan, there we go. And I'm actually going to grab her user credentials. If you give me 1 second. There she is. Oh, come on. There we go. Megan's login information. I'm going to start her OneDrive. And this is an action you only have to do the first time you utilize a new user, basically. But I wanted to show you the process of the actual login. So even though she doesn't have a defined OneDrive location, she still has this all set up within the Office 365 environment. So I went in and synchronized her entire content. If we look at the OneDrive for Contoso, that's all her information. And let me see if I can find that file for you. Oh, it may not have synchronized yet, but where that file is going to end up is basically in Megan's own OneDrive location instead of on that SharePoint site. So it's important that any rules that you set up, policies or information protection or labels, that they are defined and applied across multiple platforms, because that same document could have dramatically different security settings depending on what the location is. And you want to ensure that you may want to have policies that would prevent somebody from using a OneDrive location to share, for instance, highly confidential data. And all that could be set up within the environment itself. All right, there are other information that you can find within your Office 365 environment. And there's a lot of analytics that takes place. So within, if you have Microsoft 365, you can get additional information and have additional protection depending on what license level you are. So for instance, you can set up threat analytics to look at incoming messages, incoming information, for instance, to scan against ransomware, malware of any type, antivirus functionality, and so forth. And you can also set up investigations on your existing environment. So you can basically run scenarios against your existing environment to see if there are any potential threats. You can also set up specific policies and rules. So threat policies, for instance, or alerts for specific events. There's also an attack simulation training that you can basically run against your own environment to see if you catch bad behavior or whatever it may be within your environment as well. So I've been going for about 35 minutes. Any questions so far?
There's none in the chat window, Chris, but I mean, if anyone does have a question, feel free to either put it in the chat window or take yourself off mute and feel free to ask the question. Well, while we're talking about that, so can you cover the attack simulation training a little bit? It seems like with all the phishing attacks that are happening these days and the disruption to business operations, this seems like a very useful tool in the arsenal for IT shops.
Oh, absolutely. So what you can do with this one, and what I can do is actually just launch a simulation, and you go through a wizard basically. So there could be a credential harvest, one example. So it could be a malicious email that has a URL. When you click the URL, it asks you to log in. It could be malware and attachments, links and attachment to bad sites, specifically for credential harvest or links to malware or whatever it may be. Let's do a credential harvest just as an example. And there's multiple ways that you can do, and we're just going to do a test here. And then we can select the payload specifically for this. We can add our own as well if you want to. It could be multiple different ones. Let's just do all of these that's available for us. Oh, I didn't select one. Let's do, oh geez, let's do a COVID-19 payroll adjustment just as an example. If I want to include just one user or a specific group, let's say our HR department or our IT department, we can do that. Or we can include all individuals in the organization. And then we can assign training if you want to, training courses, whatever it may be, basically to customize that. We can, if you have a training landing page, we can have that. Let's do launch simulation and then submit. If I do a send a test, I should receive that test to my my Megan user. And it's still working here. There we go. Test email successfully sent. Check your email box in a few minutes. And hopefully that simulation test will come in here to Megan. But basically what I did was that I basically created a simulation, an attack simulation of a specific kind. So in this case, it was COVID-19 payroll reduction message that's going to appear in that email and see how users are affected. And I will then get information around that simulation. So how many users clicked the message, how many users entered in the information in the window and so forth. And that's a pretty beneficial way to see how your own user base acts when it comes to any type of messaging that comes through that type. So there we go. Here's the message, COVID-19 payroll adjustment. And this again, just a test. You can select to download pictures if there were any. We can then click the link if you want to. And then it's asked you to sign in. And as you can see in the URL, this is not an Office 365 URL. This is not the URL for Contoso. So it's obviously a fake link. But it gives me that option to kind of test the way what it looks like, and then I can go ahead and execute that exercise across the board for our individuals if you want to. So that's the attack simulation training. And here we have the test. It says status is in progress. If I click the test, I then get the information about what happened within this specific scenario. And again, we have our simulation impact. And in this case, we're only measuring if they enter credentials or didn't enter credentials. And it hasn't updated Megan's action yet. We can see the User activity report, we can see what payloads we're looking at. In this case, it was only COVID-19 payroll adjustments. And we also have some recommended actions, which is kind of interesting because we do want to require MFA for administrators, turn on sign and risk policies and so forth. So it gives us quite a bit of information about this specific scenario, and it could be very beneficial when it comes to both what actions needs to be taken from an admin perspective and when it comes to settings, but also potentially for training for end users as well.
Yeah, I noticed that it's looks like it's significantly improved from the old attack simulator that was included in Office 365 ATP. So there's a lot of analytics. There's some guidance on training, and so it looks like the security administrator or the Office 365 administrator has a lot more insight into the campaign.
Oh, absolutely, and there's also a lot of reporting across the board in the environment as well. So the Microsoft 365 Defender specific admin location has a lot of additional information. So the Microsoft Secure Score that you can go in and see both what it looks like currently and get recommendation of what security features to implement or modify. If we have any use at risk or risky behavior in the environment, that also will show up on all these various dashboards, and you can even manage devices as well. If you have any active incidents, and again, this is a demo tenant, so it's not going to be populated with a lot of information because it hasn't been live that long. But that allows us to kind of keep on top of all this information and even run our own simulations across the environment as well to kind of test it out. All right, so what requirements are there from a licensing perspective? And I have a slide that's kind of ugly. There's a lot of information, but it contains a lot of good information when it comes to the licensing levels. So in this Office 365 Enterprise E3 level, you can kind of see what's included. You do get some information protection, so the message encryption that we talked about, the rights management pieces, and data loss prevention. That's all available within the Office 365 E3 level. But if you're looking for the more advanced security features, you either have to purchase EMS, which is Enterprise Mobility and Security, or you get it with the Microsoft 365 Enterprise E3 license level. And you get all the capabilities that we just looked at, the threat protection pieces, the information protection, threat analytics, and so forth. Those are included in the Microsoft 365 Enterprise E3 and above as well. It's good to know what license level is required for the various functionalities. And obviously that's also available directly from your admin portal. You'll be able to see that. So for instance, if you go to your billing blade and you go to licenses, you'll see what licenses are applied in your specific tenant. There we go. So we have, in this case, we have Enterprise Mobility Security E5 and we have Microsoft 365 E5. Those are the licenses applied. As you can see, we have a lot of different admin centers. There are, besides the security and compliance that we kind of looked at a little bit, we also have specific settings for all our services, Office services that are running. And we also have additional configuration options in our endpoint manager. An endpoint manager is what most people refer to as Intune. So it's basically a way to manage the devices and the applications in your environment. What you have here as well is additional policies that can be applied on devices within your environment or accounts within your environment. So you have something called conditional access policies, where, for instance, in conditional access policy, you can modify how people access your environment. So you can, for instance, if you manage your named locations, that could be, for instance, all the IP ranges within your different offices. And you can specify that nobody can access internal content unless they are originating from these IP addresses. Or if they are not on your internal network, you require multi-factor authentication to sign into your internal resources. So there's additional security features that you can implement through policies directly within Microsoft 365 that will allow you to be even more secure. All right, so what I can't show you, but that's also an important aspect when it comes to secure collaboration, is how you recover if something actually do happen. And while the Office 365 product has built-in high availability and built-in disaster recovery to some extent, basically where the entire tenant is duplicated in 3 copies to always be accessible and to be recoverable if something would happen. A lot of organizations do require a little bit more granular approach when it comes to recovery, specifically around email or files. We may want to go in and recover individual files or emails from a specific time frame. There's a lot of really good third-party applications that could cover that aspect of your environment as well. I think it is worth mentioning that those tools may be needed depending on what your scenario is. Another aspect that should not be overlooked is that you probably should have some sort of governance around how to manage your environment. It's important for all the various services like SharePoint, who can make changes. If you create a new page, what would that look like? If there's any custom development, how would that be implemented and so forth? That should really be in place across your entire Office 365 services suite, just to ensure that you have clearly defined both security and deployment and management policies across your entire environment. Just to ensure that you have a clear guideline for what you need to implement. All right, that's about 50 minutes. We have about 10 minutes for Q&A, and I believe somebody else from ViCom wanted to talk about the different options that you have as well.
Yes, thank you, Chris. Donnie was going to talk about ViCom and our offerings around professional services to deliver some of the things that you just talked about. So, Donnie, you want to jump in?
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thanks so much, Chris, for providing that amazing
Sure.
demo. As you guys all heard today, although the Microsoft 365 platform has certain security components enabled by default, there's still so many different ways that Microsoft provides to their customers to tailor the security hardening experience to meet their specific business requirements. So oftentimes what we see, we have customers coming to us that are looking for assistance with those nuanced configuration services. So we help customers first, as Chris mentioned, figure out what license is appropriate for their organizations, making sure that they buy what they need and not any more than that. And then we work on a phased approach to onboard the customer into the into the Microsoft 365 ecosystem. So we oftentimes start off with a proof of concept, moving into a pilot, and then full production. We assist customers with security enablement workshops, work with the customers, as Chris mentioned, on governance and strategy, architecture, and planning. And then moving into implementation, migration, followed up by support and full managed services. It's critical to ensure that the IT infrastructure is set up to onboard the customers and assist with the adoption. Because as we all know, if we give a tool to a customer and they don't know how to use it, because a lack of training, then they won't use it, and it'll make all of our jobs harder. So we assist with end user adoption and facilitate change management. We work on a fixed scope or hourly contract, whatever works within your environment. The demo that Chris provided to you today, we have access to provide that exact demo tenant to you if you wanted to do your own testing. And it's fully populated with all demo data, and it's very, very valuable. So please reach out to us if you want to take advantage of that. Also, there are specific calculators that help us figure out a specific return on investment, so you can determine if you're buying the expensive Microsoft 365 E5 license, what does that give you, and what other tools can you potentially save money from retiring in exchange for this this tool set. And finally, Microsoft does provide funding opportunities for these types of deployments. So for example, there's an ESIF program and customer investment fund that allows you to take advantage of the Microsoft 365 suite as well as Azure within specific types of deployment models. So modern workspace, 365 anywhere, Teams adoption, security adoption, all of these different components, Microsoft makes funding available. Obviously, they want to encourage customers to move to their platform, but specifically it really does provide a ton of value when the licenses are expensive, professional services are expensive, and at the end of the day, these tools are amazing for allowing customers to take a lot of value from these tools. So and any places that you can reduce your overall costs are very valuable. So please reach out to us if you have any questions about services that you're interested in taking advantage of, as well as potential funding opportunities.
If I can add just a little bit on that as well. One thing that a lot of our customers are not utilizing currently is the additional services that are included within your Office 365 or Microsoft 365 licensing. Because a lot of companies or organizations are using Exchange, but they may not be utilizing the SharePoint services or OneDrive services and have other tools for that. And I've been seeing a lot of customers lately that are looking, especially now in the pandemic and post-pandemic scenario where they have more users working remotely, and they have quite expensive on-premises collaboration solutions that needs to be upgraded or needs to be replaced. And you have an excellent opportunity there to utilize the licensing that are already included in your existing license package and do a migration to a cloud-based solution. And the security is there for just the same security that you would have on premises can be utilized online.
Thanks, Chris. And one other thing that we often hear customers are not taking advantage of is through the CSP program, the Cloud Solutions Provider Program, which ViCom and Converge, we are one of those providers. We bundle in a tremendous amount of value in terms of dedicated sales and service engineers, as well as full 24/7 support, both for Azure and for 365. So that's something that will already come with the license. If you're interested, you can work with our team to take advantage of that.
Great.
Okay, well,
Any
thank you.
questions? All right, Tony. If anybody on the call today that joined would like to do a deeper dive into the things we talked about today, or anything that has to do with Microsoft, we're here. We're available to consult and just chat with you about your initiative. So, thank you very much for joining. Thank you, Tony, for choosing us to chat today with you.
And thanks to the Converge team. Appreciate your presentation and all the information that you've provided today. So that concludes today's call. Talk to you next month.
Thank you so much.
Great. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, guys.
Bye now.
Thank you. Bye.